Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight.
This is fundamentally about public safety. It's about saving lives.
A heated exchange over a measure to roll back speed camera tickets. That and more from City Hall.
And unfortunately, my party has utterly failed the American people at truth. It makes me sad.
An Illinois congressman will play a leading role in the January 6th congressional hearings. Our Spotlight Politics team weighs in.
Those are needless delays to the construction season.
300 workers are on strike, and it's having a ripple effect on summer road projects.
We are failing our kids, and that is not what we should be doing.
Teachers express frustration after Chicago Public Schools approved the upcoming school year's budget.
How the numerous bills involving LGBTQ rights are affecting young people's mental health.
LGBTQ homelessness flies under the radar.
Plus, a visit to a shelter in Humboldt Park, fighting for LGBTQ plus youth without a home.
It's a four-letter word nobody wants to say.
And get ready to never have to say that four-letter word ever again. Well, it's 4 letters and another word. Asian carp. You'll never have to say that again. We'll explain why. But first, some of today's top stories. President Joe Biden is calling for relief at the gas pump amid soaring prices. Specifically, he's asking Congress to vote on a temporary suspension of the federal gas tax, which amounts to about 18 cents per gallon on gas and 24 cents per gallon on diesel. Biden is also calling on states to institute a statewide gas tax holiday and for oil companies to increase their refining capacity.
And together, these actions could help drop the price at the pump by up to $1 a gallon or more. It doesn't reduce all the pain, but it will be a big help. I'm doing my part. I want the Congress, the states, and the industry to do their part as well.
Critics say the savings won't amount to much for the average consumer. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker signed a temporary freeze of the state's gas tax, which would prevent about a 2-cent increase in July. A new 24th Ward alderperson was sworn in today, Monique Scott. Scott was chosen by Lightfoot out of 19 candidates and is the sister of outgoing alderman Michael Scott, who left to take a job with Cinespace Studios. Monique Scott is a supervisor at Ellis Park in the Chicago Park District. Chicago landlords will soon have to require cooling areas for their tenants to escape the extreme heat. City Council today approved a measure that calls for all apartment complexes with more than 100 units and those designated for senior citizens to provide air conditioning in all common areas if residents don't have it in their apartments. The ordinance comes after 3 women died in a Rogers Park senior living facility during a mid-May heat wave. The cooling areas must be open when temperatures reach 80 degrees or above. And up next, a showdown over speed cameras at today's City Council meeting, so please stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabee family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
A measure to roll back $35 speeding tickets was blocked from a vote at today's City Council meeting by none other than Mayor Lightfoot. And it wasn't without pushback. Take a look at some of the mayor's confrontation with far South Side Alderman Anthony Beal.
No, sir. It's interesting that every time you are wrong, you challenge everything. Sir, please, I would appreciate. No, that's not what the rules are, sir. I think we've debated this long enough.
WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with more details on today's wild day at City Hall. Heather, first, remind us what this measure would have done. What was it about?
Well, it means that if you speed past some Chicago schools and parks and you're going at least 6 miles over the limit and you're snapped by one of those speed cameras, you're going to keep getting hit with a $35 ticket. Lightfoot imposed those fines as part of her 2021 budget, she said, in an attempt to keep the speeds down on Chicago streets and make them safer for kids.
So tell us more about this particular dispute that we just saw that prompted this intense confrontation between Mayor Lightfoot and Alderman Beal.
Well, pretty much from the moment that Lori Lightfoot took office as mayor of Chicago, Anthony Beale has been one of her most vehement and vociferous critics. And this issue of the speed camera tickets has really stuck in his craw. And he has been trying to roll them back for more than a year. And today he was on the verge of victory. And you saw what happened when Lightfoot stepped in to prevent that from happening. It was a very, very intense scene. And as you can see, this dispute got very personal between the two of them. There's no love lost there.
Apparently not. So after that clash, Beale joined forces with Alderman Ray Lopez to retaliate by blocking nearly a dozen measures supported by the mayor. Let's listen to Mayor Lightfoot's response.
Me and Alderman Lopez wish to defer and publish.
So just so we're clear, and maybe we can save some time,
okay.
Are you guys going to play this game on every item that comes out of finance and defer and publish?
Yep.
All right.
Wow, that's a yep. Heather, what did that accomplish?
So it meant there was no vote on nearly a dozen routine items that were pretty much supported by everybody on the city council. And this was Alderman Beale's way, joined by Alderman Ray Lopez, who I should say is running for mayor against Lori Lightfoot, to say, if you're going to play this game, we can play this game too. A little bit of tit for tat at a very unusual city council meeting today.
So what happens now to the proposal to roll back the cost of a speeding ticket for drivers?
Well, the maneuver that the mayor used with her allies today means that the measure can come back at the city council's next meeting, which is set for July 20th. And Alderman Beale told us after the meeting he was certain he had the votes today, and he will try to line up those votes again next month. So, as always, Brenda, it's to be continued.
Wait a month and find out what happens. All right, Heather, thank you so much. And, of course, we'll see you again later in the program for some Spotlight Politics.
Thanks, Brandis.
And you can read Heather's full story on our website, where you can read more details about that measure. It's all at WTTW.com/news. Chicago Public School Board members approved the district's new $9.5 billion budget for the coming fiscal year. District CEO Pedro Martinez says the increased budget provides for critical foundational investments. But some students and teachers say they're feeling the effects of major budget cuts.
We're in an important place, and yet we're facing such huge cuts. I'm the second and senior teacher there. I've been there for 6 years, 5 years before that on the south side of Chicago. And I'm being cut because I'm the junior member of the science department. It is hard to work there. I'm making almost the same pay as I was as a first-year teacher 11 years ago.
Let's look at today's school board meeting where board members took the vote on the budget. Joining us now to talk about it are Jesse Sharkey, the outgoing president of the Chicago Teachers Union, Ralph Martiri, executive director of the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability, and Lawrence Masol, president of the Civic Federation. We also invited Chicago Public Schools to join us, but they declined our invitation. Gentlemen, thanks to all three of you for joining us. So, here's a bit of the breakdown. It is actually a $9.4 billion budget. There are $8 billion for operating costs, $769 million for debt service, and $645 million for the capital budget. Now, this is a 2.5% increase over fiscal year 2022. And this funding comes from three main sources, of course, local property taxes, state taxes, and federal emergency funds. Ralph Martiri, let's start with you, please. What's your take on CPS's budget?
Well, it's a fairly rational budget given the context in which you find CPS's finances. So a few years back, Illinois passed a new school funding formula, the evidence-based model, which ties school funding into covering the cost of just those educational practices, which the evidence show actually enhance student achievement over time. Based on what the evidence-based model indicates CPS needs to educate the children it serves, as it stands today, they are short by about $5,494 per pupil. That comes up to an overall shortage of $2 billion. That's $2 billion less in resources than what the evidence indicates they need to serve the children that attend the school. That's really bad news given the breakdown of the student population at CPS, 78% low income and about 85% minority. So these are schools, children that have had a disadvantage in their education funding for a long time. So the fact that CPS is willing to invest a little bit more on a year-to-year basis is a good thing. I would say that the increase is pretty modest given that inflation is as high as it is. The operating costs are only going up by about 2.2%. 2 percentage points, whereas regular CPI inflation is at 8.6 right now. And even the employment cost index, which measures changes in that part of the labor market, is up by about 4.5, 4.6%. So their increases are relatively modest, and they really shouldn't be scaling back or cutting spending in any way, given that they're so short in what they need to serve the children that attend their schools.
All of that said, though, Lawrence Massal, you all at the Civic Federation, you've got some concerns about how the district is paying for this. What are they?
Our greatest concern is that the district is not showing any restraint and recognition of the financial condition most of the residents and the property taxpayers of Chicago are facing. The Chicago Public Schools has received extraordinary resources, which the Civic Federation has supported over the last couple of years in order to address the economic interruption of the COVID and the pandemic. So they are sitting on over $700 million in unallocated federal resources that they're planning or indicating that they'll use next year. At the same time, they're asking property taxpayers to have the highest increase possible, a 5% increase. This would be the highest property tax levy that the Chicago Public Schools or any local government in Illinois has been able to increase since the property tax extension limitation law took effect. There's a lot of good things in this budget, but the district needs to be showing some restraint. They need to show how they're going to manage these funds without turning to the property taxpayers all the time to solve their problems. They have resources right now that they should be utilizing.
So school CEO Pedro Martinez, of course, advocated for this proposal during the board meeting today. Here's a bit of what he had to say.
If the resources don't follow the students, it creates inequities within the same system, within our system, and even within the same neighborhood.
So, Jesse, coming to you, what are your members experiencing? Because we just heard from that teacher at the beginning who has been laid off.
There's deep cuts in schools. And I think that's the most important takeaway here is that the pandemic has been really hard on students. I had a school counselor tell me that this year they've referred more students to services for mental health services with either self-harm or the threat of self-harm than they had in their previous 16 years combined. The federal emergency relief money is designed to help people get through that trauma. As educators, we know people are crying out for it. That teacher wasn't just a teacher. She taught it at well, she was a teacher, but she taught at an alternative school, which is a school that's specifically designed to teach the students who are most at risk of violence, who haven't been able to succeed in a traditional school setting. These are the people, she's a teacher that we want to have in there helping us reach these students. And there's been a round of cuts in schools. So that, I do think that we need more funding in the schools. The federal emergency relief money has been needed, but it's a short-term stopgap. What we needed to have done was ask people who are more able to pay in the state to pay their fair share. And unfortunately, people like Lawrence's organization advocated against that and defeated that measure. So to the extent that we have a structural deficit, it comes from not asking the people who can most afford to pay their fair share for desperately needed services for students.
Lawrence, I want to come to you right after that. Go ahead.
Yes.
And I just kind of want to follow up on the fiscal part of it a little bit, because relying on one-time non-recurring federal revenue to build into your operating spending is pretty irresponsible. I mean, that money goes away and then you have a giant fiscal cliff. I mean, the thing about the $140 million bump in property taxes is at least that's recurring revenue, number one. And number two, some more context. Statewide local property taxes, this is ISB's most current data, currently cover 60% of the cost of K-12 education, while in CPS, they only cover 50% of the cost. So, CPS does have to have recurring revenue sources available to fund education. And until the state has adequate financial capacity to really fully fund the evidence-based model from state-based resources, it's really incumbent on CPS to make sure that they can educate the kids that are walking through their door. And right now, that property tax increase, even though it's a tough time, even though people are struggling with inflation, I agree with all that, is a rational and sustainable way to ensure you have recurring revenue to fund needed educational services.
So, Lawrence,
there's really not enough money left, right? If you don't tie, as Pedro said, the money to the students. And the Chicago Public Schools has been losing students at a precipitous rate. They can't continue to raise property taxes as their only solution. They have to look at consolidation and more efficiencies.
Lawrence, we've got about 30
even though they're
seconds.
losing students, Lawrence, their gap per pupil is $5,494.
I'd also like to address what Jesse said about our organization.
Gentlemen, I'm going to jump in. We've got exactly 30 seconds. Lawrence, I'm going to let you have the last word. Sorry, Ralph. Thank you.
Greater than the statewide gap. This is with the low
I
burden
appreciate
enrollment.
it. Am I going to get the last 30 seconds, as the moderator said?
It's 20
what I'd like to
seconds now,
address
Lawrence,
is
go
Jesse's
ahead.
statement that we didn't support the, I believe he's implying the graduated income tax, which was a state initiative, which was not tied to guarantees for any increased money for the Chicago Public Schools. It wasn't tied to a rational plan. The Civic Federation has supported numerous property tax increases for the Chicago Public Schools to bring it to a place of stability. What we're saying right now is at a time when the Chicago Public Schools is in better financial shape, when it has received extraordinary increases from the federal government and from the state of Illinois, now is the time to show a little restraint for the property taxpayers and to tie it to a comprehensive plan so that we're not always going for tax increases. Nothing is sustainable to grow forever. The property tax base has to be considered as it relates to all the other local governments that rely on it.
Okay, nothing we're all going to agree on tonight. Thanks to all three of you for joining us. Jesse, I know you said today was your last board meeting. I hope we will hear from you again in the future. Ralph Martiri and Lawrence Massal, I know I will talk to you again in the future as well. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
And now, Paris, we toss it back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. There's a saying that Chicago has only two seasons, winter and construction. But we could see some delays this construction season due to a strike. Amanda Vinicky joined us now to explain more. Amanda.
Yeah, Paris, since June 7th, some members of the International Union of Operating Engineers Local 150 have been on strike, specifically those who are employed by three big companies. Those are Lehigh Hansen, Vulcan, and Wholesome.
We're talking about 300 working men and women who work in pits and quarries for aggregate material producers. So this is things like sand, gravel, crushed stone, aggregate materials that are very important in making concrete, cement, various construction materials, asphalt. They operate heavy equipment.
So as he was saying there, the stone that is crushed in these quarries is purchased by asphalt and concrete companies, and then they use that aggregate raw material to, well, make the concrete and asphalt.
These companies typically have stockpiles that'll last them for a certain amount of time, but as the strike has continued, those stockpiles have begun to dwindle.
Which increasingly means there aren't materials needed to repair roads, to lay asphalt, and to do other construction work. A spokeswoman with the Illinois Department of Transportation says that the longer this strike goes, the longer and bigger that impact will be, especially in the Chicago area. She says IDOT is monitoring the situation, but if the strike persists, she says the majority of projects in Chicago will be impacted, some already halted, like soon some work on the Jane Byrne interchange. Now, other projects like resurfacing aren't even getting started without guarantees there will be product to do the work. The head of the State Road Builders Association backs this up and says the material strike is impacting construction job sites throughout Chicagoland. Layoffs are already happening, and if the strike goes into next week or two, we will see many more layoffs of workers at impacted job sites. Again, that was from the association, Road Builders CEO Mike Serino. Now, it is not just road work, though. Vertical construction, so buildings, is also impacted. I asked Mike Swinkala, who chairs the Chicagoland Associated General Contractors, if contractors have noticed.
We have been able to get a small amount of asphalt from some of our suppliers. However, their inventories are running low.
And he says the word is that those supplies could soon be coming to an end. The contractors group is surveying its members to get a better hold of just how big this impact has been and could be.
We're hearing anecdotal stories of projects that have been delayed that can't get materials. Some of the owners and agencies are not allowing substitute materials. And also, we're hearing stories of some of our members that are actually shipping in materials from quarries that are out of the area.
And yes, that does raise costs. Now, there are other companies that do mine these raw materials, but the strike is impacting the trio of the companies that really produce the bulk of the limestone, sand, and aggregate that is produced around this area. Now, they negotiate collectively, these companies, as the Chicago Area Aggregate Producers, or CAPA. Nobody from CAPA was available for an interview, but the group sent a statement saying that CAPA and Local 150 union leaders continue their negotiations on a new contract. CAPA received its first wage and benefit proposal from Local 150 on Friday, June 17th, after 6 bargaining sessions without one. CAPA offered a counterproposal Monday. This past Monday, June 20th, the ball is in Local 150's court at this time. We are willing and ready to continue talks and to get employees back to work. CAPA also says that it's paying workers who are impacted here. Well, they generally, when they work overtime, they get paid 1.5 times their regular wage. Also, these workers have their health care premiums covered 100%, and workers during COVID got additional pay and a bonus for being vaccinated. But Local 150 says it's not striking over benefits and pay.
Over unfair labor practice charges, again, unilaterally changing the terms of a collective bargaining agreement, threatening employees, coercing employees, interrogating employees. All of these things are basic worker rights that are laid out in the National Labor Relations Act, and all of which these 3 companies violated.
The union says that it is ready, willing, and wanting to get at and stay at the bargaining table, but the aggregate producers are the ones that are refusing to do so. Now, as we heard mentioned a little bit from the head of the Road Builders Association, when road and construction work is delayed, that doesn't just impact those of us who drive on the roads. It also means that other workers, so those who drive trucks, who build the roads, could also soon be out of work. And IDOT says some road construction, again, it has already halted because of the strike. There will, however, be other construction work still going on. So IDOT warns drivers to still follow those construction zone speed limits and be careful to avoid any workers who are out there on the roads, especially, by gosh, in this heat. Back to you.
Of course, be aware of all that. All right, Amanda, thanks so much. And we'll see you again for Spotlight Politics a bit later in the show. And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. As people around the world celebrate Pride Month this June, we're highlighting leaders making an impact for LGBTQ plus individuals. Chicago Tonight's Joanna Hernandez visited a Humboldt Park haven for those without homes and spoke with a woman driven to provide queer youth a safe place to live.
El Rescate, good afternoon.
Zenaida Lopez is the director of El Rescate, a transitional living program in Humboldt Park.
If I have somebody that comes in and is just sleeping in an alley.
For the last 10 years, Lopez has helped hundreds of LGBTQ youth get back on their feet.
Most of the residents that come to us are residents, homeless youth that are ready to say, I have to challenge myself to change the trajectory of my life. I have to be able to find a place where I can learn to become self-sufficient and reach independence. And this is what El Rescate is about.
El Rescate, meaning rescue, is a shelter providing residents like Isaresa Rodriguez a safe place to live.
I realized that I was bisexual, and I told my mom, and she was like, oh, that's inappropriate, that's
phase.
Right, but also she said that it wasn't right.
Rodriguez came out when she was 12 years old and says it has been hard to gain her mother's acceptance.
I never understood that she'd tell me that it was okay if my cousins were gay, if anybody else was gay, but that I couldn't be. And that really messed with me.
As a new resident at El Rescate, Rodriguez will have opportunities to grow and receive job and educational support.
To me, it's very beautiful that I can take a resident in here and provide them with their basic needs just to make sure that they get ahead and then they can succeed, and that they have a place where they are not afraid to say I'm gay, are not afraid to say I'm a lesbian, that I'm not afraid to say I'm transgender.
Lopez says her passion to help queer youth comes from her own experiences, the challenges of feeling different at a time when being queer was looked down upon.
I lived a lie. I did not live an authentic life growing up, and it was a very, very difficult journey for me. And talking about it still resonates with me in terms of those emotions that I had until this day.
Being disowned by parents or getting kicked out of their homes is a scenario Lopez says happens too often. According to a survey conducted by the Trevor Project, more than 40% of LGBTQ plus youth across the country reported they were kicked out or abandoned due to their sexual identity.
She kicked me out, and that was just the final straw. I was like, no, I need to find a place. And my best friend, Jacob, has been a resident here before, and he told me about El Rescate, and he brought me.
The center runs as a community living space where residents have jobs, cook, and prepare themselves to eventually find a place of their own.
I have kids that came through our program that graduated college.
What started with 6 residents 10 years ago has now housed hundreds of LGBTQ plus and HIV positive youth.
It's my second home, but also I still can connect with all these young individuals. And that's the beauty of this, that I still can reach out to them, that I still can talk to them, that I still can teach them, because it's about love.
How does it feel to tear someone from the inside out without remorse?
As Rodriguez begins her journey at El Rescate, she says she's focused on opening her own theater company one day.
It's just really hard to know that I am on the right path and that I'm doing what I need to do and what I'm supposed to do. And my family just doesn't understand that or accept that.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Joanna Hernandez.
El Rescate is an initiative out of the Puerto Rican Cultural Center. You can find more information on our website. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, how Pride Month can provide hope and community for LGBTQ youth struggling with mental health.
You may not think it, but it's truly a lot of love inside of these chambers.
Monique Scott, sister of outgoing Alderman Michael Scott Jr., is confirmed to replace him. That and more on Spotlight Politics.
It's a 4-letter word nobody wants to say.
And get ready to never have to say the name Asian Carp ever again. We explain why. But first, some more of today's top stories. Residents looking for help with substance use disorders or mental health now have another resource.
We understand that it's really complicated to navigate the healthcare system, and that we don't always feel like we can trust it, and that we don't always feel like we're going to get a call back. But there are going to be people here who are going to help you navigate a really complicated system and not let you fall through the cracks.
The Cook County Sheriff's Office is launching the Community Resource Center, where people can get help with a wide range of needs, including housing or employment assistance, food, and clothing. Mental Health America says more than 700,000 people in Illinois with a substance use disorder don't receive treatment. Neither do nearly 1 million people with mental illness. Neighbors in Auburn Gresham will have easier access to the Metro after the groundbreaking of the new Auburn Park Station.
We all understand that stations provide residents with easy access to jobs and to the region, which alone is a significant benefit. But they also contribute to the community's overall vitality. Easy access to transportation improves home value and attracts new residents. And as Jim said, our station becomes the community hub that supports local economic development.
The $28 million facility is set to have a large landscaped plaza with bike racks and benches, as well as a vendor building. Construction is expected to last about 30 months. And Chicago basketball fans have another all-star to cheer for. Sky forward center and two-time WNBA champion Candace Parker is set to play in the all-star game on her home court when the game comes to the Wintrust Arena on July 10th. This is Parker's 7th all-star selection. And now we go back to Paris, who I hear has some fishy news. Paris.
I do indeed, Brandis. Asian carp are officially no more. What's that you say? The leaping invasive fish that threatens the Great Lakes ecosystem have swum away to friendlier waters? Not necessarily, but the name Asian carp is now a thing of the past. That's because Illinois officials, along with representatives of the commercial fishing industry, announced a rebranding. The fish will no longer be called Asian carp and will henceforth be known as, drumroll, Kopi. It's a long time coming, and last summer I visited some commercial fishermen to find out why the pending name change had them swimming in, or leaping with, optimism. Dirk Fusick is the purveyor of Dirk's Fish and Gourmet Shop. He says Asian carp may one day be more popular than tilapia.
And I think it's a better fish than tilapia. It's healthier than tilapia. Tilapia is omega-6 fish instead of an omega-3 fish, so you get a lot less benefits of health from tilapia.
To prove his point, Fusick is grilling up some creative carp cuisine, from carp Cuban burgers to carp tacos to regular old smoked carp. But despite the accoutrement, the Asian carp is not yet a bestseller.
I'm not making any money on it at this point in time.
As you may know, Asian carp are the leaping, invasive fish that have taken Illinois waterways by storm. Governments have spent hundreds of millions of dollars keeping them out of the Great Lakes, for fear they could destroy the lake's ecosystem. But now, the Illinois Department of Natural Resources believes it may have found a fix, and it costs next to nothing. They're going to change the fish's name.
We're trying to make them, the name, more attractive so that people be more inclined to purchase these fish and try them and have them as table fare, have them for dinner.
So what exactly is wrong with the name Asian carp?
You made a face when you said carp, so.
A typical carp is a bottom feeder, a smelly, gooey fish that isn't appetizing to anyone. Asian carp, however, feed on plankton and are not like other carp.
As far as freshwater fish, if they're prepared right, probably about as good as it gets.
We visited commercial fishermen Dave Buchanan and Clint Carter on a recent morning, hauling in 4,000 pounds worth of Asian carp and other fish in the Peoria Pool, part of the Illinois River. Carter says he recently invested in a new boat and fishing equipment, hoping the name change leads to a coming boom in demand.
It'll help us expand our business and concentrate on harvesting these fish.
Right now, commercial fishermen get a government subsidy to fish Asian carp out of the Illinois River to help control a massive population that has moved in and taken over. Some of these fish are destined for fertilizer or other industrial uses, but others, especially the bighead carp, could soon be on your dinner plate. That is, once they have an enticing new name. As for the criteria,
something simple and short and not carp, you know?
And there is precedent for this. Chilean sea bass was initially called Patagonian toothfish. Orange roughy, initially known as Pacific slimehead. After a typically productive day in the Peoria Pool, Dave and Clint haul their load to Source Freshwater Company, a Peoria-based fish processor and distributor. Owner Roy Source says he pivoted his business 9 months ago after 50 years distributing food and dry goods. He, too, is betting big on the name change.
Right now, we've already created probably 30 to 40 new jobs just in the first 9 months, mainly through the fishermen.
Source says the meat is lily white and plentiful, but there's one more impediment to culinary success.
The one bad thing about carp is that it's bony. And I can't give you an 8-ounce boneless piece of carp. So it has to be processed ground up into something. So it can be burgers, sausages, hot dogs, meatballs, taco meat, anything you could think of with ground meat.
Which brings us back to our taste test. First, the carp burgers. Here we go. Carpe diem.
Very good.
Next, the Asian carp fish taco.
It's really, really good.
And finally, smoked Asian carp.
I mean, tastes like smoked fish.
Right? And the reviews were mostly satisfactory among customers.
The general impression I had was they were sort of throwaway fish, but it tastes fine.
Illinois public officials will reveal the name change, hoping seafood lovers protect Illinois waterways and the Great Lakes from an aggressive, invasive species by eating loads of it. And again, that aggressive, invasive species is now called Kopi, no more Asian carp. So the new name was supposed to have been unveiled last year this time, but we're told that officials from other Great Lakes states wanted in on the rebrand discussion, so it got delayed. The name Kopi is a play on the word copious, because we know how quickly they multiply, and officials believe the words Kopi taco or Kopi burger will catch on. Maybe Kopi jerky, too. Who knows? WTTW News reporter Patty Wetley has more on today's announcement on our website. And we're back with more Chicago Tonight in just a moment. But first, we take a look at the weather. A record number of bills affecting LGBTQ rights are being introduced this year in the U.S. That's over 300 bills, and more than 130 of them specifically target transgender people, according to the Human Rights Campaign. Mental health professionals say this is having a great impact on LGBTQ youth and their mental health. And joining us to talk about that impact is Lola Wong, founder of Fig Tree Consulting, and Paviela Foster, Chief Program Officer with Howard Brown Health. Welcome both of you to Chicago tonight. Lola Wong, so what impact are these bills having on mental health, specifically among youth in the LGBTQ community?
First of all, there are actual barriers being set up. For example, some youth, they need trans-affirming care, and because of those barriers, they won't be able to access to the service they need. So these services are not just regular service, these are actually life-saving services. So that is crucial for their safety. The other thing is it also prevent them from using some of the coping skills. For example, for some youth, they would do physical activity in order to cope with their symptoms of depression or anxiety. And now, because of their trans, they might not be able to do those things. There are also a lot of things going internally. We are all trying to cope with this rapid changing pandemic world in which insecurities and change have become the hallmarks. At the same time, our mental health is so fragile. For those trans youth or other LGBT youth, they frequently worry, what could happen next, what else could be taken away.
And in fact, to that point, USA Today published a survey saying that there's been an increase in LGBTQ youth reporting instances of discrimination or harassment. Paviela Foster, and you've asked us to call you Dr. P. So, Dr. P, is this increase directly related to this wave of legislation we're seeing in the country targeting LGBTQ rights?
Well, absolutely. And while it has been way before these bills have been passed, you're talking about there's been 240 bills just in 2022 alone. That's almost 3 bills a day that is anti-LGBTQ. Our young people, they're on daily on social media. This is their platform. So anything that is shared and reshared and discussed and talked about, they are seeing, and that is an impact on what they're doing, how they navigate systems, how they navigate communication with other folks. And so that is a huge way of how folks are generating and getting all of these things. These bills are really prohibiting the service lines and the wraparound services that they need to be able to get the support that they need on a day-to-day basis.
And speaking of support, President Biden recently signed an executive order aimed at combating some of these bills. Among other things, the order directs more federal health and education funding for gender-affirming care and to advance inclusive learning environments in schools. What practical impact do you think this could have?
The impact that it has, if you talk about just alone here at Howard Brown with the Broadway Youth Center, one of the biggest things is having those service lines for young people. When you have services where they can wash their clothes, where they can take a nap, where they can get mental health services, or they can just sit down and rest and relax, you need those services, because without that, then they're not learning how they're going to connect with other people, how they're learning about themselves, how they're learning about systems that they're connected to, and how these bills impact their day-to-day. And you tackle on top of that trauma is a huge thing. You're talking about somebody who may be experiencing homelessness, and if you're experiencing homelessness along with all of these other things, that just makes your journey, your life journey, your experience a little bit rougher than the next person.
Lola Wong, is it better to have conversations about this legislation, about what's going on in the country, or if that's causing even more stress on top of the stress that this community already faces, is it better to just avoid these conversations?
First, you shouldn't be avoiding any of those conversations. Anything For example, according to a new research, supportive actions taken by parents and caregivers for LGBT children can lower their risk of suicide by more than 40%. So you really need to have those conversations. When you're talking about these issues, you need to consider your children's age and development stage. You don't want to try to hide what's happening. At the same time, you also need to deal with your own anxiety and try not to let your worries to affect your children. And when there are a lot of things that are outside control, talk with your kids about, what is under control, what can be done in this family. Maybe you can use the correct pronouns. Maybe you can educate other family members. Maybe you can connect your kids to professionals, therapists, or even a mentor, just to show them that, even there are things that are outside our control. Just, being LGBT, there's still a lot of possibilities, and your support as a parent will make this so much easier for them.
And Dr. P, we have this discussion as Pride Weekend is coming up, the parade. Does this sort of combat some of the stress that the LGBTQ community is facing due to this legislation? I mean, to celebrate the community, does this provide some hope?
Yeah, Pride Month, Pride Week, Pride celebration always is going to give hope, because that is what we're built off of, is advocating for these type of spaces, these type of conversations to happen. And so when you have a month that is geared towards celebrating your authentic self, just who you are, to show up who you are, it does help. It does help. And then there are some ways where it could also cause some strain, because then you're trying to explain why you're attending certain things. And then sometimes when you do go to some of these events, some people are not there to celebrate just you. They're not there to celebrate the love. And so having these type of conversations, educating young people on, there are going to be some folks that are going to be there that are not going to agree. And this is how we handle these things. This is why we advocate. This is why we have these conversations on a day-to-day basis, because we want you to feel supported. But does it bring joy? Does it bring excitement? Absolutely. And that's what we want. That's what we want young people to feel.
And I assume some of these conversations will take place this weekend amid some of the revelry that is expected to go on. And our thanks to both of you, Lola Wong and Paviella Foster. Dr. P, we appreciate it. And this conversation, by the way, is part of a focus on mental health this month on Chicago Tonight, leading up to the June 27th premiere of the two-part documentary, Hiding in Plain Sight, Youth Mental Illness, presented by Ken Burns here on WTTW. And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. And of course, you'll stay right there, because the rest of our Spotlight Politics team is also here to discuss damning revelations from the January 6th hearings. Plus, we have the latest on some key primary races with elections less than 1 week away. And it's all in the family at City Hall. Here with all of that and more is our Spotlight Politics team, Heather Sharon, Amanda Vinicky, and Paris Schutz. So let's start in the 1st District. After nearly 30 years in Congress, Illinois' 1st Congressional District, Bobby Rush, is deciding not to run for a 16th term. Paris, there is no shortage of candidates to replace him, but who stands out in this race?
Well, I mean, anyone who lives there, they might as well just sign up and run, because everyone seems to have an equal chance. When you have 21 candidates, I mean, some elected officials are in this race. State Senator Jacqueline Collins, Alderwoman Pat Dowell. You've got Jonathan Jackson, the son of Jesse Jackson. You've got Jonathan Swain, the CEO of Lincoln Academic Scholars. You've got Amina Matthews, who's been involved in violence interrupters. You've got Karen Norrington Reeves, who has got Rush's endorsement. So there's been some intrigue here. Jonathan Jackson received $500,000 from the billionaire owner of a cryptocurrency exchange, and that same billionaire has also supported Chuy Garcia and another downstate race. But Jackson's also gotten endorsed by Bernie Sanders. So some of Jackson's opponents have called him out. They say he hasn't disclosed any of his financials. They want to know why he's being supported by a billionaire, if he's going to be a true progressive. So that might lead one to believe that maybe they view him as a front runner there, maybe because of his name and the financial resources. But again, Karen Norrington Reeves, the one endorsed by outgoing Congressman Rush. So I'm not even a venture to guess who's going to win that one, other than the one who wins it might get less than 20%.
That's one to watch for sure. Another longtime African-American congressman from Chicago, Danny Davis, who has represented the 7th Congressional District since 1997. He's running again as well, of course, but he faces a challenge from the left in Keena Collins. How does this race look like it's shaping up, Harris?
It's very interesting. Keena Collins, a very young community activist from Austin, 31 years old, being supported by this political action committee, Justice Democrats. It's associated with politicians like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the congresswoman from New York. Danny Davis is not used to getting a challenge. I mean, he's been there for many, many years, a staple in the West Side and some of the western suburbs. But Collins is getting some money from this progressive group. She's been able to run ads now, calling Davis out for missing votes, for not standing with the community enough in her mind. She also, very interestingly, there was a concert at Metro earlier this week from the rock band The Strokes endorsing her. I'm not sure why that progressive group picked this race to target. Danny Davis has been voted solidly Democratic, voted with Democratic presidents, but there you go. You've got the progressive group, Keena Collins. Davis has not really participated in any debates or anything, so the Davis camp believes they're fine, that it's not a huge challenge, but we'll wait and see.
So statewide, in the race for Illinois Attorney General, a position that's currently held, of course, by Democrat Kwame Raoul, the Democratic Party of Illinois seems to be trying to prop up the candidacy of GOP candidate Tom DeVore. Amanda, what's going on?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of sort of cross-party interference in Illinois, in other states as well, but this is a really interesting one. So you have a GOP primary between David Shostakis, he's a suburban lawyer, and then also Steve Kim. He has run statewide before. He's a Korean American, and he is on this slate that had initially been funded by Ken Griffin. So had some money, was, I think, sort of expected to be the candidate, but then Tom DeVore entered. That name might sound familiar. He is the attorney who really fought against the mask mandates in schools and restaurants and public places. And Governor J.B. Pritzker has openly called him a grifter and really taken umbrage with Tom DeVore completely. Now we see from the DPI paying for what is virtually an advertisement promotion for DeVore. This is something similar to what we've seen in the race for governor, where Democrats, with, again, funded largely by Pritzker, are getting into that race, trying to get a conservative elected that would make it easier in the general election. It seems as if they fear if, for example, Kim were to win, that Kwame Raoul might have a tough time keeping on. Now, you talk to Democrats about it and they say, what? We're just trying to help voters understand what we're dealing with. But really, they're getting out in front because they would prefer DeVore win, with the expectation that's going to make the general election easier for Democrats.
So let's go back to City Hall. Heather, you were there at what looked like a very lively city council meeting, of course. But before we get to some of those fireworks with Alderman Beal and the mayor, let's talk about Monique Scott. She was confirmed in a 47-0 vote to replace her brother, Michael Scott Jr., as alderperson for the 24th Ward. Here is what Monique Scott said just after the confirmation vote.
I want to thank everybody on City Council right now. I am a part of this, and the love, and you all don't, you may not think it, but it's truly a lot of love inside of these chambers. You all are my role models, and I will continue to look for you for advice and for counsel during these next challenging months, I'm sure, and over the next 4 years, hopefully. No, not hopefully, over the next 4 years.
Heather, it seems like all the love in the room. I wonder if she said that before or after the spat between Alderman Beal and the mayor. But did that idea of passing on the position from one family member to another, did that raise any eyebrows?
Well, if it did, those eyebrows were silent. Nobody mentioned the elephant in the room, which was that she is the new Alderman Scott replacing the old Alderman Scott, and a newly created city council familial dynasty joins the ranks of the Burks and the Mells and the Lorinos. And nobody mentioned anything. And it was especially a little bit awkward when one of Monique Scott's first votes she had to recuse herself from because the city agreed to sell 2 vacant lots lots it owns to Michael Scott's family, specifically his wife, Natasha Scott, for $8,000. Now, she had to cite Rule 14, which says you can't vote on something that might create an appearance of a conflict of interest, but nobody mentioned that conflict of interest.
Interesting. And how about that mention, though? She did mention the next 4 years. She intend to see out her brother's term and then run for more?
Well, that is certainly the implication, because as it is right now, this appointment lasts through May of 2023. If she wants to serve 4 years, she's going to have to win the full term on her own. And of course, this is how those familial dynasties have lasted this long. You resign early, you give your chosen son, brother, friend a leg up, and you help them run for office as an incumbent. And that is certainly the playbook here. We'll have to see if it works in the 24th ward as it's worked in so many other Chicago wards.
Okay, so we had the fourth January 6th Congressional Committee hearing about the attacks on the Capitol January 6th. There was some powerful testimony yesterday, including from Georgia election worker Shay Moss, who testified about the harassment that she and her family faced. Here she is recounting a panicked call she got from her grandmother.
This woman is my everything. I've never even heard her or seen her cry ever in my life. And she called me screaming at the top of her lungs, like, Shay, oh my gosh, Shay, just freaking me out, saying that there were people at her home and they just started pushing their way through, claiming that they were coming in to make a citizen's arrest. They needed to find me and my mom.
Amanda, I imagine it's going to be hard to keep filling the role of election worker if this is the kind of abuse that folks might face.
Yeah, Brandis, I honestly don't have an easy answer for who would want to take that job in this climate. Certainly, there are plenty of people who do so. Those, by the way, are long hours at the polls, and the pay, there is some, but it is not great. And really, the way that you have secure elections is because of poll watchers, because of people who step up to do those sort of jobs. But certainly that testimony, a lot of it was really heart-wrenching and frightening, and that is going to be yet another thing that elections officials are going to have to contend with.
So another hearing is set for tomorrow, and Illinois Congressman Adam Kinzinger is supposed to play a lead role in that one. Here is a little bit of what he has said, what he told ABC's George Stephanopoulos on Sunday.
I'm not worried personally. This threat that came in, it was mailed to my house. We got it a couple days ago, and it threatens to execute me as well as my wife and 5-month-old child. I've never seen or had anything like that. It was sent from the local area. I don't worry, but now that I have a wife and kids, of course, it's a little different. There are people that, there is violence in the future, I'm going to tell you. And until we get a grip on telling people the truth, we can't expect any differently.
Now, Kinzinger is a veteran, a conservative. Paris, what does it say about the state of the Republican Party that Kinzinger is being ostracized for speaking up?
Well, getting death threats mailed to him and about his kid and about his wife, I mean, it says the rhetoric has gone way too far. I mean, you also have a candidate, a leading candidate on the Republican side for senator in Missouri running an ad talking about hunting rhinos, Republicans in name only, with a shotgun, busting in with a SWAT team, not really appearing very tongue-in-cheek here, but implicating some kind of violence, you know, for Republicans that dared to go against Trump. I mean, that's unacceptable, and you didn't see a whole lot of folks on the Republican side calling that out. And so you have Kinzinger there saying he has a very ominous forecast here. There's violence in the future. We've had divisive rhetoric for so many years, and that rhetoric, by the way, has been profitable for a lot of media companies. But what's happened is a lot of folks believe now that violence or thoughts of violence are justified, and then you have politicians like the guy running in Missouri feeding into that and saying, yeah, they are justified, and elect me senator. It's obviously gone way too far.
Now, Amanda, we also have former President Trump coming to Quincy, Illinois this weekend to stump for Republican congressional candidate Mary Miller. How much is Trump's endorsement worth in Illinois?
I think it depends on where in Illinois, and certainly in that district, the 15th, it carries a whole lot of weight. This gets back to sort of the role that our elected officials, I think, have played in polarizing the country and in the state. This is a district redrawn in the latest redo of the map to pack as many Republicans in as possible. So this is Mary Miller running against a first-term congressperson running against Rodney Davis. He is hoping that name recognition, much of this district contains the area that he represents. And although he was co-chair of Trump's campaign, he did not get the nod from Trump. Rodney Davis is not backing away, saying he's proud of his work with Trump, but clearly this is something that Mary Miller's campaign is going to celebrate, and one that I think, in the country will sort of be watching to see, answer really that question, just how much weight does Trump carry?
Of course, and we know former Vice President Pence was in town recently. Current Vice President Kamala Harris expected to be in town on Friday. We'll have a lot more to talk about, all of us next week, thanks to the Spotlight team, Heather Sharon, Amanda Vinicky, and Paris Schutz. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. The Pride Parade returns for the first time since COVID-19 hit. We visit North Halstead for our In Your Neighborhood series.
And a new art show about masks and visibility, curated by Chicago rapper and activist Vic Mensa. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great evening.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.
Hawaii, a realm of breathtaking beauty.